Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan Podcast, where we delve into those profound lessons within Islamic tradition and all that. Today we're kicking off another deep dive, and this time it's Sahih Bukhari Hadith, Book 40. That's the one about distribution of water.
Oh, yeah. This is a really fascinating one.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Water. I mean, we all need it to live.
Right.
But it also, it becomes this springboard to explore ethics, social dynamics, even economics.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about the Sahih Bukhari collection in general, right? I mean, these hadiths, they're narrating the Prophet Muhammad's words and actions,
Yeah.
but in a way that focuses on these practical aspects of, Islamic teaching. So it's not
Yeah.
just airy theory.
Right,
It's
exactly.
about how do we actually live this stuff?
Yeah, it's all about illuminating these deeper principles through really simple everyday examples. And in this case, it's water. We're not just talking about staying hydrated. We're talking about how you manage resources, communal responsibility, the ripple effects of your choices.
Right.
It's really cool.
So, okay, imagine for a second you're in 7th century Arabia,
Okay.
desert, right?
Yeah.
Water's precious.
Mm-hmm.
Now picture this. The Prophet's got a drink left over.
Yeah. Okay.
There's this young boy nearby.
Yeah.
Hadiths 541 and 554 tell this story.
So what's remarkable is that you've got all these older, more important people around, but the prophet, he prioritizes the boy. He even asks his permission before offering the drink to the elders.
Wow.
This isn't just being polite, it was radical for the time. Back then, children, I mean, they weren't given that kind of agency.
Right, you wouldn't even think to ask a kid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes you think, was this a way of deliberately challenging the established hierarchy?
Yeah.
Or was it more about highlighting the inherent dignity of every single person, no matter how old they are?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
It's this really beautiful way of showing that everyone deserves respect. And this idea of prioritizing those on the right, even if they're not the most senior, it shows up again in Hadith 542. You've got the prophet sharing a drink. Abu Bakr, his close companion, is sitting to his left. Umar, another companion, suggests giving the drink to Abu Bakr first, but the prophet insists on serving the person on his right, a Bedouin.
So it's this consistent principle, it's not a one-off.
Yeah.
Fairness and equitable treatment, regardless of your social standing.
Absolutely.
It's you could almost see the raised eyebrows, those unspoken assumptions being challenged.
Totally. And imagine the impact, right? This isn't just about sharing a drink.
Right.
It's about how we perceive and treat people. And this connects to this broader Islamic principle of adult justice, balance, putting things in their rightful place.
Okay, so that brings us to water as this shared resource.
Okay.
Hadiths 543 and 544 specifically forbid withholding surplus water. And they link that to the well-being of livestock and the prosperity of grazing lands.
Right. And remember, this is the desert. Water scarcity was a constant threat. So hoarding water, it wasn't just selfish. It could put the entire community at risk. It's a ripple effect. Your actions impact everyone.
So your actions are affecting the whole ecosystem you're a part of.
Yeah, exactly.
Which makes Hadith 557 even more powerful.
Oh, absolutely.
It lists withholding surplus water as a major sin.
It's huge.
It's really emphasizing how seriously this act is taken in Islamic ethics.
Yeah, it's not just etiquette. It's this transgression against the community. And this hadith would have served as a stark warning, right? Making people really reconsider their actions and prioritize the good of everyone.
Wow. Now, these next hadiths, they address consequences, but from a slightly different angle.
Okay.
Hadith 545 says there's no blood money required for death in a well, a mine, or from an animal.
So the reasoning behind this is actually really fascinating. These are considered natural hazards. They're inherent risks you take when you're doing those activities. So it highlights this concept of fate and individual responsibility. It's acknowledging that not every misfortune means someone has to pay or be punished.
So it's saying, yes, it's a tragic loss, but it falls under understood risks.
Exactly.
It's a very different way of thinking about accountability.
Right. But then you have this sharp contrast when you look at Hadiths 546 and 547. These are about deliberate acts motivated by greed, like taking a false oath to get someone's property or holding back water just because you're selfish.
And in these cases, the consequences are way more severe, right?
Absolutely.
There's this idea of divine wrath, a reckoning for violating these fundamental ethical principles.
The difference is all about intent. Unintentional harm versus calculated greed. The hadiths draw a clear line. It's they're trying to create a society where people aren't just afraid of punishment, but where they actually want to be just and fair.
So this makes me think about the whole concept of justice in Islam.
Mm,
Do we see that playing out in other hadiths about water?
absolutely. Hadiths 548, 549, and 550 tell this fascinating story. It's a dispute between Az-Zubair, the Prophet's cousin, and an Ansari man over using irrigation canals.
Okay, so now we're moving from abstract principles to like real-life conflict resolution.
Exactly.
This should be good.
The Ansari man, they're the people of Medina, the ones who welcomed the Prophet and his followers when they had to leave Mecca. And it's interesting because the Prophet's initial ruling, it seems to favor Az-Zubair.
Oh, okay.
But the Ansari man, he respectfully points out that there might be some bias there.
Wow, he's like challenging the Prophet's judgment.
He is, and that's what's so amazing. The Prophet, showing his commitment to justice, he reconsiders. It's this reminder that Islamic teachings, while they come from divine revelation, they were also applied to specific situations and open to being reevaluated in light of new information.
That's remarkable that the Prophet, seen as the ultimate authority, was willing to change his mind based on new insights. It really speaks to humility and seeking truth, even if it means questioning your initial assumptions.
And it actually connects to a powerful verse in the Quran, 4.65. Even the Prophet is urged to submit to just arbitration. This story highlights the Prophet's role not just as a spiritual leader, but as a model for how to lead ethically in practical matters, too.
It's like leading by example.
Mm.
Okay, so we've seen how these hadiths address fairness between people. But what about our relationship with other living beings?
Oh, good question.
This next set of hadiths takes us in a different direction.
Okay.
Compassion for animals.
Nice.
Hadith 551 is a great example. It's this story about a man, he's super thirsty, but then he sees this dog
Yeah-oh.
panting by a well. And he risks his own safety climbing down the well just to give the dog some water. And he's rewarded for this act of kindness.
It's such a beautiful illustration of how Islamic ethics go beyond humans. It includes all living creatures. It makes you realize that even something simple like giving water can be this profound expression of compassion and piety.
And this is emphasized even more by the contrasting story in Hadiths 552 and 553. A woman imprisons a cat, and it dies from hunger and thirst.
Ah,
And the Hadith says that she faces serious punishment for this act of cruelty.
that's rough.
So we see both sides of the coin.
Yeah.
Reward for kindness to animals and punishment for cruelty. It's a clear message that animal welfare is built into Islamic teachings.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just avoiding harm. It's about recognizing the worth of all creatures and expanding our compassion to include them. This was being taught centuries before these ideas became popular.
This is all so fascinating, but I think we need to pause here. Let our listeners really take this all in. We've gone from a simple sip of water to social hierarchies, resource management, the nuances of justice, and even how we treat animals. It's amazing how these simple acts have such deep meaning.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Sahih Bukhari Hadith, Book 40, Distribution of Water. Before we took a break, we were talking about how important it is to be compassionate towards animals. You know those hadiths about giving water to a thirsty dog and the punishment for being cruel to a cat?
Yeah, it's really powerful how these teachings from like way back then emphasize responsibility towards all living beings. It makes you wonder how those principles could apply to our modern world.
Oh, absolutely. What we're learning here isn't just stuck in the 7th century. It's timeless wisdom that goes beyond any culture or time period. Before we move on, I think it would be good to look at a few more examples from Book 40. They can add to our discussion.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm excited to see what other insights we can get from these hadiths.
Let's start with Hadiths 555 and 558. They both deal with water rights and access. Hadith 555, it highlights that you're allowed to draw water from a well for your own use, even if the well's on someone else's property, as long as you're not harming or bothering the owner.
So it emphasizes the idea that resources should be shared and that we shouldn't stop others from accessing them.
Exactly. It's about balancing individual needs with responsibility to the community. Hadith 5518 takes it even further. It says that if someone digs a well to benefit themselves and others, they'll be rewarded for every person or animal that drinks from it.
It's like this ripple effect of generosity.
Yeah.
One simple act of providing water, and so many benefit from it.
Now, Hadith 556, it tells the famous story of Hagar, Prophet Ibrahim's wife, and how she desperately searched for water for her baby, Ismail.
Right.
She's running back and forth between the hills of Safa and Marwa, desperate for water. And then God reveals the Zamzam well. It's this source of pure water that still flows to this day.
Oh, yeah, that's an amazing story. It's about hope and divine providence, but also about never giving up and the potential impact of our actions, even if they seem small. Just like Hagar's search led to Zamzam, maybe our efforts to share and manage water responsibly can also have a huge impact.
Exactly. And speaking of impact, I think it's time we move on to a theme that shows up later in Book 40. Work ethic and self-reliance. Hadith 559 talks about owning horses. It highlights that owning these animals can be a source of reward for those who use them for God's cause or honest work. However, it warns against using them for pride or showing off.
So even owning animals is seen through an ethical lens.
Yes, it's all about your intentions and making sure your actions are aligned with higher principles, even in simple things like owning a horse. This leads us to Hadiths 560, 561, and 562, where the Prophet really encourages hard work and being self-sufficient.
Yeah, I remember reading those. It's a big contrast to just accepting charity.
Right. Hadith 560, it's about what to do when you find lost items. It underlines honesty and making an effort to return them to their owners. Then, Hadiths 561 and 562, they say that even gathering firewood to sell, which was considered humble work, is better than begging.
It's like the Prophet is saying, don't just wait for handouts. Take initiative and use your skills to provide for yourself. Very empowering. It's about dignity.
Absolutely. These hadiths connect to the broader Islamic teaching that emphasizes earning a living honestly, no matter how small the work might seem. It's about contributing to society and being proud of your ability to take care of yourself and your family.
That idea of honest work is so relevant today.
Yeah.
We're always bombarded with messages about getting rich quickly.
It's a good reminder that real satisfaction comes from working honestly, from using your skills to contribute, not just looking for shortcuts or relying on others. Now that brings us to the last section for this part of our deep dive, the hadiths that deal with economic practices during the Prophet's time.
This is something I'm really curious about. How did those early teachings handle all the complexities of trade and business?
Hadith 563 talks about an incident with Hamza, the Prophet's uncle. It involved camels and some kind of issue. While the details are specific to that situation, it shows that respecting other people's property was important, even before alcohol was explicitly forbidden.
So even before specific rules were set, there was this sense of ethical behavior in business dealings. It's like these inherent values were the foundation of those early teachings.
Yeah, and now we get to a really interesting concept that's discussed in Hadiths 566, 567, 568, and 569. They deal with araya, which was a common economic practice back then. To really get what these teachings mean, we need to understand what araya was.
I have to admit, I've never heard that term before. Can you explain it?
Imagine you're in the Medina marketplace. Dates are being traded everywhere, right? Because they were a staple food. Araya was a kind of sale where dates that were still on the palm trees were sold for dates that were ready to eat.
So it's like a futures contract for dates. I get it. But why did this practice need specific guidelines?
Well, you can see how it could be messy, right? The quality and amount of dates on the trees could be different. That could lead to arguments and unfair deals.
I see. So these hadiths were providing a framework to ensure fairness and transparency in those date transactions.
Exactly. Hadith 566, for example, prohibits selling dates for a fixed time period unless you clearly say how much you're selling. And Hadith 567 prohibits selling what's in the womb of a she-camel. Basically, transactions had to be based on real, measurable things.
It's all about reducing risk and avoiding vagueness that could lead to someone taking advantage of someone else. That's so smart.
And it shows how these teachings weren't just about big ideas. They were about giving practical guidance for everyday life, even down to the details of trading dates. They offered a moral compass for economic activities. Trade and commerce had to be ethical, fair, and just.
Wow, we've covered so much today. Water rights, how we treat animals, the importance of working honestly, and even how they traded dates. It's incredible how these hadiths show us the social and economic landscape of that time.
And even more importantly, they offer these timeless principles that can guide us today. They encourage us to be mindful, just, and compassionate in everything we do. But I think it's time for another pause to give our listeners a moment to think about everything we've explored. When we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Sahih Bukhari Hadith, Book 40, Distribution of Water.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Sahih Bukhari Hadith, Book 40, Distribution of Water. We've gone on quite a journey, haven't we? From simply sharing a drink to the complexities of trade and commerce back in 7th century Arabia.
It's amazing how these hadiths can be rooted in such a specific time and place, but still offer these timeless insights into human nature and the ethical principles that guide a just and compassionate society.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the details of like each individual hadith, but when you step back, you see this overarching theme of interconnectedness that runs through the whole book.
Absolutely. That's a really important observation. Whether it's sharing water with someone who's thirsty, respecting someone's property, or being fair in trade, these hadiths show us how our actions have ripple effects. They go beyond just ourselves. It's a reminder that we're part of this larger web of life, and our choices impact the well-being of everyone and everything around us.
Yeah, it's like a chain reaction. The way we use and manage resources, treat each other, even interact with animals, it all contributes to the balance and harmony of society as a whole.
Exactly, and that sense of balance is so crucial. These hadiths aren't just about following strict rules, but about cultivating awareness, compassion, and responsibility. They're like encouraging us to think about the long-term effects of what we do and work towards a world where everything can thrive.
It's a really powerful message, especially today when we're facing things like water scarcity, environmental problems, and economic inequality.
Hadith 557, the one that says withholding surplus water is a major sin, takes on a whole new meaning when you think about the global water crisis. It makes us question what surplus even means when so many people don't have access to clean water.
Right.
It pushes us to look at our own habits, to be aware of how our choices affect the availability of water for others, both locally and globally. It's about moving beyond this idea of scarcity and embracing sharing and responsible stewardship.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener, not just about the teachings in Sahih Bukhari Hadith, Book 40, but about how relevant these principles still are today.
It really shows how these hadiths can make us think, challenge what we believe, and inspire us to live more ethical and mindful lives. They remind us that even simple acts like sharing water can be powerful expressions of compassion, justice, and responsibility.
Well, thank you for joining us on this Echoes of Ihsan deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and that it sparked a desire to explore these teachings even more.
May we all strive to embody the spirit of Ihsan in our lives, seeking excellence in everything we do, and creating a world where all beings can truly flourish.